Good evening, members. Good evening, members. It's 6:30, so we're going to commence the meeting now. So, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Communities Housing and Environment Committee. I'm Lara Banks, Democratic Services Officer, and I will take the committee through the first 3 items on the agenda following the resignation of Councillor Daniel Rose as Chair and Councillor Jonathan Pearl as Vice Chair of the committee. If the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Okay, so item 1, apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Mrs Joy, Councillor Mortimer and Councillor Bartlett. Item 2, notification of substitute members. So we should have 3 substitute members. Could you please confirm your name and who you're substituting for?
Councillor Perry for Councillor Bartlett.
Councillor Robertson for Councillor Joy.
Councillor Cox for Councillor Mortimer.
Thank you. And we'll move on to item 3, which is the election of the chairman. So can I have nominations, please, for the election of the chairman?
I'd like to propose Councillor Pearl as chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that, please?
Yes, I will second Councillor Bell.
Thank you. And do we have any other nominations? Okay, so Councillor Pearl is appointed as the chairman of Communities Housing and Environment Committee. If you'd like to come up and take a seat.
Good evening. Right, now I propose to take under item 4, urgent items, the election of the vice chair of the committee. And from the chair, I'd like to propose Councillor Simon Webb for that, please, if there's a seconder.
Again, I would like to second Councillor Simon Webb as vice chair for this committee.
Excellent. Are there any other nominations? I'll take that as no, and so that's resolved then that Councillor Webb will be the vice chair for the remainder of the municipal year. Now, item 5. Might I ask any visiting members to make themselves known, please?
So,
Sorry.
Councillor Clive English for the item on Brenchley Gardens, which I believe is item number 20.
Indeed it is, thank you.
Councillor Hinder for item number 12. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hinder.
Good evening, Councillor Nagy, East Ward.
I'd like to speak on any of the items if I indicate, but especially number 20, Brenchley Gardens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. Right, item 6, disclosure by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers, please? That's certainly none from the members. I take it there's none from the officers that we are aware of? Thank you. Item 7, disclosure of lobbying. Have any members been lobbied on any item, please? Mrs. Banks will do a roll call of members for these purposes.
Councillor McKenna? Sorry, I didn't turn my microphone off. Can I just ask you to confirm again, Councillor McKenna?
No.
Thank you. Councillor Newton?
No lobbying.
Councillor Pearl?
None.
Councillor Rose?
No.
Councillor Webb?
No lobbying.
Councillor Young?
No lobbying.
Councillor Cox?
None.
Councillor Perry?
None.
Councillor Mrs. Robertson?
None.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, questions and answers session from members of the public. We do actually have one. We have a lady by the name of Sue Gullett who is going to ask a question. And could I ask you to come forward to the microphone and ask that, please? Oh, right, okay. Okay, then for the purposes of the microphone, it may assist if Mrs. Banks reads the question so that it can be caught on the system.
She is here, but I think she's missed a few items, item 8 and 9 and 10.
Oh, right, so I have. It's me scrolling forward in my enthusiasm. So, item 8, I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Is that agreed, members? Excellent. Item 9, oh yes, the minutes of the last meeting. It's probably a bit of an omission to not to take those, wasn't it? Now, can I ask members, are the minutes appear on pages 1 to 6 of the bundle? Are they agreed? Thank you, excellent. Item 10, presentation of petitions, and we have none. So that then brings me back to where I was a couple of minutes ago in my enthusiasm. Item 11, questions and answers session from the members of the public. And this is the point at which I ask that for Mrs. Gullett's question to come forward.
So she's on the call.
She's on the call. Will it be caught on the technology? Because this is the thing that Miss Parfitt was... If you could, yeah. Do you have the answer?
This is Susan Politics. Should I start?
Please, yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So I'm asking this on behalf of Maidstone Climate Emergency Network. We would like to thank NBC for participating in the No Mo Mayor scheme. I personally have particularly appreciated Church Green so far, some of which has been left uncut this year, and I've heard some positive comments about it from other residents. We've also been heartened
Thank you very much. Yes, a short answer and a long answer. And the short answer to your question is yes, I do very much agree with you on that point. Now, there's a longer answer that the officers have kindly prepared for us, which I will, if you indulge me, I'll quickly dance through for everybody's benefit. And that is that the MBC are beginning a public communication and engagement campaign for the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan. This campaign will be closely tied to Action 8.4 of the Action Plan to, quote, engage with and build support from key stakeholders and the wider public on enhancing biodiversity and addressing climate change, unquote. The aims of the campaign will be to inform and engage with the general public on tree planting plans and biodiversity enhancing activities, and will seek local community support to develop action groups to take part in planning and biodiversity enhancing activities. Specifically in regards to negative responses to No-Mo-May, action will be taken for wider public communication and information on the benefits of the scheme, and appropriate signage will be used at public sites. Additionally, where possible, MBC will be looking into encouraging further wildflower growth so that these areas no longer appear untidy and instead appears intentional and biodiversity enhancing. Only one area in Staplehurst was included in the MBC No-Mo-May initiative, the Limes Open Space. We had 2 inquiries about this. One was to leave it in flower for as long as possible into June, and another request to cut a path through for an elderly dog with short legs. No MBC sites received negative feedback. All had temporary signs erected for the duration of May, set out in the No-Mo-May press release. We were aware, though, of requests for roadside verge cutting on Kent County Council highway land across the borough, mainly due to the wet spring accelerating grass growth at all locations and their 6-week cutting regimes. The MBC land off Church Green was maintained as normal this spring-summer. However, the land known as Church Green at the junction with South Bank is owned and managed by the local housing trust. They may have adopted a different regime. Additionally, the Green Staplehurst group affiliated to the parish council have been looking at areas to enhance biodiversity locally and have been in discussion with owners and managers of public land. Now, I did say it was the longer answer, so and that was quite lengthy. But Ms. Gullett, would you like to ask a supplementary question arising out of the original question or the reply?
Can I just say that, sorry, I lost most of your answer because for some reason the Skype call disconnected and I've only just reconnected. So I'm afraid I missed most of your answer, but I know I can catch up on that on the webcam. So, not to worry. But I do have a short supplementary question, yes.
Okay, well, please ask away.
So simply this, is the committee aware of the Road Verges campaign organised by the charity Plant Life, which provides information and resources to councillors, including a PDF for posters or signs?
Well, I'm going to sort of answer off the cuff and say, no, I wasn't aware of that, but thank you for pointing that out, and it's something I will make sure the relevant officers are aware of. So
thank you. I think councillors can sign up to become part of the scheme.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Now, that now concludes the questions and answers session from members of the public. So the next item on the agenda is questions from members to the chairman. And there is one question from a member, which is from Councillor Hinder.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have received lobbying from a number of my ward residents regarding the perceived outdated practice of giving away live pets, namely goldfish, as prizes. Has this council considered the effect of giving away animals as prizes, and would it support a move to ban the giving of live animals as prizes in any form? This outdated practice occurs on land, I believe, owned by the council and also on private land. Does this not therefore give clear indication that this council condones this outdated practice? Would this council support national moves for an outright ban on the giving of live animals as prizes? Thank you.
Thank you, and the answer that's being kindly prepared here is that whilst it's illegal under the Animal Welfare Act to sell an animal or give away an animal as a prize to a person under 16 years of age, unless accompanied by somebody over the age of 16, the activity of giving animals as prizes on a whole is not banned in law currently. However, if the fish aren't being dealt with competently and their welfare needs are not being met, it can be argued that the person responsible is not addressing the 5 welfare needs. That's the 5 welfare needs, and it could be challenged under the Animal Welfare Act 2006 by an appointed inspector. Now, the practical issue about council land, I'm being told here that Maidstone Council standard terms and conditions for the hiring of our land or Jubilee Square for events already expressly forbids the practice of displaying or giving away as prizes any animals, birds, tortoises or fish, which I know that when we just briefly spoke before this meeting seemed to conflict with information you'd been given also by council officers potentially. So I don't know whether you'd like to ask a supplementary question there.
No, just to state that I will pass back to these residents the comments that have been made, and I will also express my disappointment that although I've received quite a large number of amount of lobbying on this, I'm disappointed to see that none of them are here this evening, although I did invite them to come to the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I think it's one of the issues with those sorts of standard emails that they are very standard, and there isn't a great deal of personal engagement in them, unfortunately. Right, so if that concludes the questions from members to the Mrs. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. I would very much like to support Councillor Hinder in his comments and in his question to the Chair, as far as all living creatures should be treated with respect and consideration for their welfare and health. So I'd like to support him in that. And thank you very much, Councillor Hinder, for bringing that into the committee.
Okay. Thank you, and I do actually agree with you for what it's worth. But if we can move on now then please to item 13, committee work programme, which is on pages 7 to 8 of the bundle. Now, I'm told that the Heather House and Pavilion update will be sent to the committee via a briefing note instead of as a formal report. Now, can I ask, are there any questions on the work programme we've got? Councillor Rose.
May I go slightly off-piste at the moment, Chair, because unfortunately I will not be here for our next meeting. May I ask Mr. Littlemore any comments that he may have as far as pets policy, which will be on our work programme next meeting?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The policy is due to come back to committee. The information that we've reviewed at the moment would suggest that officers will be recommending that the policy that was a pilot for a year is adopted into permanent policy. There was also a request, you might remember, from Dee, who's been lobbying the council on this point, about naming the policy, and that's something as well the officers will be recommending that members may want to consider doing that. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's positive news, because I believe we are all behind this. Sorry, Councillor Rose, do you want to come back?
I'd like to add that when we reviewed the tenants' policy at, I think, the last meeting, I'm very much in favour of the rules and restrictions that are put down in the tenants' committee piece of paper. I think it covers a great deal of that. I would actually like to remind the committee that this whole situation came about because of the tragic suicide of a resident, and also to say well done to Maidstone Borough. We are leading the way in this through our hard work. An early day motion was raised in Parliament, and I know that it has been raised nationally and internationally interest. So I think that's something that we can be extremely pleased of. Thank you very much, Mr. Livermore, for your work in this.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Rose. Might I ask, are there any actual comments on the work programme? Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am subbing for Councillor Derek Mortimer, who has asked to check whether over the page, on page 8, the options on tightening the approach to littering, graffiti, waste and crime is actually covering the report about the street scene performance in cleansing and how the staff interact and whether they receive any incentives about their performance, if you see what I mean. So will that item cover what he was expecting to see on here as a different report, perhaps?
If I may, we did have a discussion on this subject at one of the earlier agenda setting meetings, and I believe the idea is when the, I get her title right, the Head of Environment and Public Realm returns from her leave, we were sort of contemplating having a meeting involving Councillor Mortimer to discuss this sort of thing before things went any further. I don't know if Mr. Littlemore or any of the other officers wish to comment on this. It's not really your bag, is it, John?
No, it's not bad. I can certainly take back Councillor Cox's observations, and if that's any different, I'll ask Mr. Edwards to contact you. Thank you.
I'll pass that back. Thank you very much.
My only own observation on this work programme is that immediately next to that item that Councillor Cox just referred to, we have Parks Delivery Plan for Biodiversity. It's currently marked as to be confirmed, but Mr. Cornell assures me we will have this before Christmas, and that's quite important, I suspect, because we'll probably reference that in later items coming up. Now, is the work programme agreed, members? Excellent. Right then, so item 14, reports of outside bodies, and we have none, which brings us then to item 15, where we've had Sue Chalkley and Anne-Marie Roberts from Golding Home sitting patiently for some time while we've just sort of gone through all of our sort of back and forth here. So without further sort of delay, I will hand over, if I may, to Sue Chalkley.
Thank you, Chair. May I thank members for inviting us back. We presented in February this year, and I think the hope was that we might be able to check in, say, at 6-monthly intervals, and so it's really good to see you again, and thank you. So today, we've got I'm hoping the slide pack's in fact, I understand the slide pack has been circulated to everybody separately, so we've got 10 minutes, so we're going to go at quite a pace through this. This is what we intend to cover today. Then the next slide, we were asked to just set out who was on our executive team, and this is us with our pictures, I'm afraid, and Tom Casey and David Hart are not with us because we've got such a limited time to speak, but Anne-Marie is going to take the bulk of the presentation. And then just moving quickly on to the next slide, which just gives you the highlights of the corporate plan that has been approved by our board that we're now in year 1 of. It's a 3-year corporate plan. And I hope you can see from the vision that it is aspirational, and it's intentionally aspirational. We've been in regulatory measures. We still are in regulatory measures. We have an in-depth assessment in Q4 from January to March 2022, and we hope that we might be able to come out of regulatory measures after that. So I would say that we're emerging. Our action plan is 94% complete, so we're nearly there. But we do have real aspirations for fundamentally changing our approach and focusing first and foremost on our customers, on the service we provide them, and on the safety of their homes and the kind of keeping their homes in good condition. But as you might imagine, it's a long journey, and that's what we really value, being able to work alongside you on. You can see the 4 corporate objectives. Anne-Marie's going to talk about the first 3. The 4th one is quite internally looking, making sure that we're in good order from a governance perspective. And then you can see we've got 3 values which are really simple. And we consulted with our customers on these, and we took one out and jiggled them around a bit in response to their input. And they are that we care, we welcome new ideas, and we take pride in all we do. So they're quite clear, and hopefully values that all of our colleagues feel able to sign up to. So at this point, I'll hand over to Anne-Marie.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair and members. I'm Anne-Marie Roberts. I'm the Director of Operations. So just taking over from Sue, I'm just going to run you through some highlights from the presentation. Really, as Sue has said, it's a real change of focus at Golding Homes. It's all about the customer. So I'll just take you through some practical things we've done over the last 18 months to show the progress and the things we've got planned going forward. We launched a campaign focused purely on customer service called What About Shirley, where one of the things we did is every single person or employee of Golding Homes went through customer service training to try and raise our standard and our game. This campaign has since been nominated for a national award as well in recognition of the work we've been doing. But as Sue said, we appreciate there's more that we need to do as an organisation. So we're doing a lot more on customer satisfaction, customer engagement. All customers have much more of an influence in how we do things at Golding, and we try and involve them now as much as we can in different things, including strategies. But investing in our homes is very important to us. And most of you will be aware of the Regeneration Program we're planning of the Shep Way as well. And then we're also currently looking at our provision for older and more vulnerable people. So we'll be working on that later on this year. Just briefly going to talk about safe and well-maintained homes, which is one of our corporate objectives. It's really important for us to invest in our current homes before looking just to new developments. Some of the things we'll be putting in place, for example, is we'll restart a cyclical decoration program. So I think from a member's perspective, that will start to enhance the overall quality of our estates and how customers experience where they live, and we want them to feel proud of where they live. So we'll be doing lots more work on how we look after our estates and our buildings. We do regular inspection resumes for quality and safety of our homes, which is really important. 2 big challenges for not only for us, but for all housing associations is building and fire safety. So our current plan includes £5.1 million investment in fire safety works. And then decarbonisation is also a big challenge for us. So at the moment, our main focus is bringing all of our homes to EPCC standard by 2030. And then looking at our data to make the best investment decisions about becoming net carbon zero by 2050. So we're collecting data at the moment, but also we're running a couple of pilot programs to see what we can do with the homes to make them, to bring them up to that standard, or looking at regeneration. That's a big piece of work for the organisation. Another area where we're putting a lot of investment in is our repairs and maintenance service. In February, we brought that service in-house, moved away from a subcontractor that was helping or running that service for us. And so we still have a lot to do, and we do get quite a few queries from councillors on the repairs topic, but we're continuing our improvement. So between February and July, for example, we've reduced the complaints by 50%, which we received on that service. Our other main KPIs around repairs completed at the first visit, so that's around 86% at the moment. And all our emergency repairs, we aim to get to within 24 hours. So just just under 100% of those. And then we're also looking to reduce the amount of repairs jobs we have open, as many organisations and housing associations. We built up a bit of a backlog during all the restrictions, but those numbers are coming down very nicely, and we hope to bring them to a normal level in the next month. Okay, I was asked to also briefly touch on ASB, just put together a pie chart to give an idea of what sort of ASB cases we are dealing with, and the top 3 here is around harassment, domestic abuse, and also noise nuisance. The items we are prioritising at the moment is we are a key partner in the Maidstone Task Force. We have a dedicated individual who work with MBC and the police on that project. We also now have delegated authority from the council to issue community protection warnings, and that's been used by us. So that's a great example of partnership working with the council. And then what we want to have a much more focus on support on domestic abuse, which is something there was quite an increase in during lockdown and people spending more time at home. So we are working to get accreditation in that area, so that means we will be able to provide much more support to our customers. I won't go through all the rest, but we're also running quite a few community engagement events in August and September, where we'll be going out on estates and speaking to customers, door knocking, and working with customers on the top priorities for them, what we can do in specific areas to make it more enjoyable for them, any specific things around their building and estate. Wanted to share customer satisfaction. It's something we're now measuring in more detail. And yes, we still have a fair bit of work to do. So for the year from April to June, our customer satisfaction is around 64%. When we started to measure this in December, it was in the mid-50s. So we've seen quite a significant increase, but it's not where we want it to be. Our aim is 80%. Just to give an idea, this is what our repairs complaints look like. So as I said, it's coming down, but there's still a bit of work to do. So we're hoping for those numbers to continue to decrease as the months carry on. And I won't go into this in detail, but I wanted to set out in the presentation the learning, because I think it's really important not to just have complaints and deal with them, but how does the organisation change as a result of those complaints? So customers, even though their individual complaints resolved, the organisation can actually improve overall. So there's quite a few lessons we've learned and items we've implemented. So for example, the customer service training, overall the way we handle our complaints, and you know, that whole thing about taking ownership and how we wrap up a repairs job at the end, and if the job's not completed, so customers know exactly what will happen next for them. Also just wanted to give a bit of a breakdown in terms of the queries we've received from councillors. We've had 12 since we introduced our MP and councillor dedicated inbox. That was done on the back of the last meeting we attended. Thank you very much for using that. So that's a sort. Repairs are one of the largest areas of inquiries, but we get quite a variety of items through to us. And then again, just similarly to before, we do take that information, process it, and see how we can learn from that, and improvements have been made at Golding as a result. So just on to the last part, I won't go into too much detail, but thank you so much for the survey. We completed this on the request of Councillor Burton. So thank you on his request. So thank you for the participation in that. Definitely mixed results from councillors. So we'll aim to invest and continue to work harder in our responses. We had, I think the biggest changes we've made as a result of that survey is we are going to reduce our response days to 5 working days, coming back a bit faster. And also we are going to give a weekly update on any open cases. If we can't resolve it in those first 5 days, we'll give a weekly update until that matter is closed down, and we'll monitor it, and we won't let go of it until it is resolved and customers happy that it's resolved, and yourself. And then there's just a general satisfaction with Golding. So quite a bit of a spread, but we're hoping if we do this survey perhaps again in a few months to see if your opinions have changed of Golding and on the back of the work we are doing to improve our services. And then there's some specific feedback received. I won't go into that into detail, but specific queries that were left, we have provided response there, and that's been circulated previously. Just want to say thank you very much, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's very encouraging. Now, who'd like to start with the questions? Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not actually a question, it's just a comment, actually, because I've had occasion to use the dedicated councillor email, and I must say I'm very pleased with the response, and I've been given weekly updates as far as the, conclusion. It hasn't been concluded yet, but I am being updated in what's happening, so thank you very much. Very, very grateful for that contact. Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that. It was a very interesting presentation. We'd received it previously, so I've read it. I have one question to ask you. When you receive complaints from the residents, do you categorise those complaints into different sections? So then you would be able to see where you get the most complaints or the least complaints.
Thank you very much for the question. You absolutely do that. So we do a lot of analysis around that, the themes, so we know exactly why people are complaining. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but the majority of our complaints do relate to repairs and maintenance because that is the biggest service we provide as an organisation.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As a result of the first lockdown, which was obviously the harshest one at the beginning of COVID, I had cause to visit quite a number of varying providers' homes. I won't be specific. But since then, have you sort of not only taken stock, I can see you said you're looking at your housing stock, but have you taken stock of where people are living? Let's just, for example, say an elderly gentleman, because he's lived with you for quite a long time, now lives on the 6th floor of something. Do you review what people's needs are as they change, as they get older, or they may be suffering from long COVID now? And are they requesting to change their location for these types of reasons? So it's a very general question, but I want to know, has COVID made you change the way you assess whether people are in the correct housing?
Thank you, Councillor. We've not specifically done a survey to that extent, but we do offer management moves, and that's something we can consider. We're also reviewing, at the moment, as I said, our older people and vulnerable people provision. So that's probably something we'll be looking at probably the next couple of months, I think. We've set aside some time to look at that, and that's actually quite a welcome comment. It's a different way of looking at it as well.
Sorry. From a building safety perspective, one of the lessons from the Grenfell Tower inquiry is that it's as important to know about our residents' circumstances as it is to know about the condition of the building. So the work that we're doing on building safety, and the board's now going to be receiving a report at every meeting on building safety, and the work that we're doing there is starting to understand our residents better. But I have to say they're in the high and medium rise blocks. The other work is, exactly as Anne-Marie said, looking at our services to older and vulnerable people and how we can improve those, and we're working with our residents on that.
If I may just come back, Mr. Chairman. One particular concerned a visually impaired couple who I found it quite hard to negotiate my way with large box around their premises, and the paths were terrible in conjunction with grassed areas. So I think looking at people's needs that may have changed, and the way that that's what concerned me. But if you wanted to come back to me, and if I'm meaning about your stock, then I'm happy to talk with you or have a look around. Would be very good. Thank you.
May I add one more supplementary, and that is that during the lockdown, which is the period that we were talking about, we rang every single tenant to ask how they were doing, and if there were any specific needs, we put in place either immediate support or kind of advise them as to where they could go for support. But certainly we'd be really interested to speak to you about that. Thank you. Yes, I've got that.
Okay, I believe Mr. Littlemore would also like to just come in there as well.
Thank you, Chair. Just in fairness to our colleagues from Golden Homes, the Council does administer all the transfer requests as well as new applications for people coming onto the housing register. So we would hold some of that data in addition to what Golden Homes have locally. So it's an interesting question, and we know we've had a significant increase in applications to join the housing register since the COVID period. But I couldn't tell you offhand how many of those were from existing tenants as opposed to new people, but it's certainly something that we'll look at as part of the review we'll be doing of the allocation scheme this year, and I know we'll be having discussions with Golden Homes about reviewing the allocation scheme before it comes back to the committee, so thank you for raising it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you for the report. There are 2 mistakes in it. You've got a spelling mistake of noise, which is noise on your pie chart, and the councillor satisfaction percentage adds up to 105. So if you're making presentations to the regulatory body, I would triple check what's there, and I'm saying that in the nicest sense. Can I come back? You mentioned you will be re-examined from January to March next year. Is that right? Have I got that right? Within that period, okay. I'm used to regulatory challenge. I've been part of it for 40 odd years. Will you be undertaking a pre-inspection review, or will somebody be doing that for you? Because what you don't want and what we don't want is for that re-inspection to provide you with something that you didn't know about. That's the first question.
So
Sorry.
We certainly are planning for our in-depth assessment in Q4, and we will be bringing in external consultants to help us with that. Having said that, we have an extremely comprehensive recovery action plan with hundreds of actions, and every single one of those has to be evidenced, and the evidence has been supplied to the regulator already. So we've got a body of work that will put us hopefully in a, I don't want to say a good place, but in a relatively...
I thought you might say that. I'm quite averse to paperwork in terms of ticking boxes and saying we've done that, when actually it's the on-site checking mechanism which is the greatest answer you can have. Another point, complaints reduced by 50% from February to July. What does that mean? It's reduced from what to what?
Thank you. I can show the slide quickly. So we had a peak of complaints in February, which was 55 complaints, and so now we're running a sort of on average mid-20s, but we would like to reduce that further.
The other point, which I think I've got here, the customer satisfaction. You've set yourself, I would say your customer satisfaction is low at 70%. And I'd also would have thought, you did mention it, that from the start, from November it was 55%, let's round them up, and we got to January it was 70%. That is quite a peak and moving forward, and that's great. But I would have expected that peak to continue until you came up against some serious issues that were going to take time to resolve. But what we found from January through to June, it's been a wave, and actually where we are, or where we were in June, you've reversed back down to 62%. So would you like to comment on that? What are the reasons behind it? I'm not challenging in terms of the stats, I just genuinely would like to understand what's the reason behind that, because your regulatory body will come at you very hard over this data.
Thank you. That's a really good question. Yeah, so one of the key drivers for the lower customer satisfaction is the feedback we're getting around our estates. the cleaning and caretaking service, and also how well we look after the estate. So that's driving the figure down. That figure continues to go down. But also we have been doing quite manual customer satisfaction. So only in last month in July, we moved to a new system where it's much easier for customers, so they can do it by text message or email if they prefer. Whereas before it was quite manual, didn't have a system. So the response rates weren't as high as we would like it to be. So we'll probably see quite a jump. We have seen actually quite a jump. I didn't have the figures when I did the presentation. Quite a significant jump up as we're moving between the two systems. But yeah, I would say estates and cleaning and caretaking is driving the downwards trend we've been seeing between from April to June.
Sorry, Chair. Okay. One more. We're now virtually in September. You've got a window of January to March, as you said, for the next regulatory inspection. Will we be getting another report before that time? I know I heard you say 6 months. I just wondered whether it would be feasible to receive another report before you're regulated again.
If it was convenient for we will happily come and present to you at any time. Yeah.
That may be a conversation to have three-way with Mr. Littlemore and Mr. Chalkley. If there are no other questions, I would like to just sort of quickly pop one in, and that is just based on your answers there to Councillor Webb. I can see that the 50% reduction in complaint figures obviously comes from the 50% relative to the peak, or to the recent peak. I was wondering how your current complaint figures are relative to, say, the sort of the 12-month average, or indeed the 36-month average. Do you have any data on that?
I don't have any data at hand, but I can, from a recollection from the last time I presented on that topic, say that we've seen an increase in complaints at Golding from just prior to Sue and me joining the organisation. So let's say that the end of 2019. So we've seen a much higher level of complaints, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think before we didn't handle complaints very well, perhaps didn't actually record them centrally. And also I think there's been a change in the way our customers perceive us. And Sue, for example, she does a CEO phone day every few months where customers can ring her directly. I'll let her talk about that if she wants to. We feel our customers actually feel a bit more that they can come forward to us now, because before perhaps nothing would happen. So it's quite normal to see quite a high increase in the complaints numbers. So that's happened, but it is reducing slightly, but it's at a much higher level, consistent level than before, back in 2018 and 19.
I certainly think from the free phone day, the comments that I was receiving at the beginning, there was very much a flavour of people saying, well, I don't even really know why I'm bothering, because I've just kind of given up. I let you in to service my gas boiler once a year, and other than that, I don't really bother. And that there's a kind of a sense of apathy and just loss of confidence in us. And I think I've said to Anne-Marie by way of an encouragement that actually the fact that we've got more complaints coming through in perversely, I think is probably an encouraging sign that people feel it's worthwhile complaining. They've spoken to their neighbours and have said that things are starting to be done. So we probably can expect a bit of a bow wave to come through before we get on top of it and start to reduce them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you. I do hear where you're coming from in regards to the people don't want to complain anymore because they've just lost hope, and I get that a lot. That there's just no point. I've got a question, if I may, in regards to the fire safety. How many buildings that need the EWS1 certificate as a percentage have been done, or how many are yet to be done?
Thank you for that question. We've got 8 buildings over 18 metres. So recently there was an announcement by government that the EWS1 certificates won't be applicable to buildings below that level. And of those 8, 7 is within the local authority. We don't have any EWS 1 certificates yet because we need to do building safety works on all 7 blocks in this local authority. 3 of those blocks are newer, so we're working with the developers there, so they, with a view of them doing the works and bearing the costs. And then we have 5 more traditional built blocks where we are planning in the works, but they are less urgent. So they're less urgent, it's less risky than the 3 newer blocks where there's more substantial issues to address. But yeah, we won't be able to get the EWS 1 forms until we've completed those works. So we're currently working with consultants on all of those blocks, so to make sure that when the works are done, we can get those certificates.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions, or have we done, do we think? Excellent. Well, just to sort of say thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for your presentation and for your taking the time to answer members' questions. And we look forward to seeing you again. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
So, members, we have next on the agenda we have item 16, which is the reference from the Policy and Resources Committee concerning the lessons learned, which I'll come back to in a moment, from Nomo May. And this is going to be introduced for us by Mrs. Banks.
Thank you. So on the 23rd of June, the Policy and Resources Committee considered the Biodiversity and Climate Change Action Plan and felt that the campaign promoted by the Council could have been better advertised. So they decided to refer this to this committee for consideration of the lessons learnt for the Nomo May campaign. There's an extract of the minutes within the reference, so it's up to the committee whether they would like to take that forward.
Thank you. Members, do we have any comments or questions, please?
Yeah, I've just got a comment. Oh,
sorry, Councillor, you have to sort of raise your hands and stuff, I'm afraid, yeah. So Councillor Cox was in first.
It's either that or the naughty step, Simon, right? That's fine. I think there are going to be some things that come out in this report. And one I think that affected us, if we'd have had quite a dry May, I don't think we would have had the growth in the grass and indeed the wild meadows that were initially sown anyway, growing so much that to leave them for the whole month meant they couldn't use the machinery, what I saw in the Vinters Park area. And then when they were able to, it meant they couldn't just go over with one, they had to then go back with various other tools and all that sort of thing. So I wonder if consideration of one, planting more seeding more wild flowers, but designating them as the initial one where Go Green, Go Wild, I think, started this all off. And indeed, so many people, they did have signage saying that these were being left. But to say that everywhere was being left, I think in some people's cases was too much. But I think it was exacerbated by the amount of rain and therefore the growth that took place. In a sense, spoiled it, but it didn't, because it meant Maidstone was very lush for an awful long time. But you do in various areas have that impact of it looks unkempt. And I think that's a shame, because it's marvellous to allow that growing period to be left. But I think if we designated areas that we knew were going to be left, and the approach roads or key areas were kept, I think that could be a happy medium that our residents would be able to take on, and we wouldn't get so many questions as when we're going to have this cut. Which brings me to my last point. I think being able to liaise with KCC making sure there are no areas that are, well, I thought you were doing it. No, you're doing it. And I think there's a lot of that. So liaising is going to be key with this as to the outcome. And also members, councillors, knowing when the areas are being mown. Because that would stop us trying to have to contact officers, and I'm sure there's a queue somewhere of all members going, well, I've had 6 phone calls this morning. It would be much easier, surely, because they must have a schedule. Making sure we have an up-to-date schedule, I think, would be brilliant, because we can then help by being able to have it at our fingertips when things are being done. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Webb next.
It's okay, Chair. Councillor Cox has covered the 2 points that I wanted to raise.
Okay, excellent. Well, I've got Councillor Perry next then.
Thank you. Yes, I think Councillor Cox has probably hit the nail on the head, but in my area, there were areas that were a bit of a mess, I have to say, and also I think from a driver's perspective, slightly dangerous actually, because the vision, wasn't there. So I think it's down to communication. We need to, if we are going to do this, it's a great idea, don't get me wrong, I'm not being critical of it, but we need to have better, better, that's not the right word. We need to up our game on the communication so that people understand what's happening, because I think a lot of my residents didn't know what the hell was going on, to be honest, and I think we need to think about that. So that's all I really wanted to say. But it some areas did look a bit of a mess, I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know whether other members had any comments from dog owners, because I had quite a few. Apparently the grass seeds are very dangerous because they can get in dogs' paws and also up their noses. In fact, one resident said that he had to take his dog to the vet to have one of these seeds removed, and of course it was quite distressful for the owner and the dog, and obviously quite expensive. So, I mean, that is a problem with letting the grass grow. And another practical point, it's a bit difficult to pick up the feces as well.
I think I've heard people make... I believe I've heard...
Not that I've done it myself, because I'm actually a cat owner, so I don't have to worry about that.
No, I believe I've heard people make comments about rubbish generally getting caught in overgrown areas. Now, I said earlier when we were talking about the work programme that we'll have the Parks Department report on their contribution to biodiversity coming before Christmas. So if as I suspect, we agree to progress this to this item, the Chief Executive tells me that maybe this can be reported on within that particular report when it comes back to us, if that's okay with members. So I propose that we agree to review the lessons learned and progress the item accordingly. Yeah, is that agreed, members? Excellent, thank you. Right. So that now then brings us to item 17, appointment to the Howard de Walden Centre, and this will be introduced again by Mrs. Banks.
Thank you. So the Howard de Walden Centre is a charity providing youth and community centre for the residents of Maidstone. There are 2 trustee positions which are reserved for council representatives, usually restricted to East and North Ward members. We've received 1 nomination from Councillor Cox, which was attached at Appendix 1. However, we didn't receive a second nomination from East and North Ward members, so the nomination was opened up to all members. We've still not received a second nomination, so it's been suggested that a non-councillor could be appointed if the committee chose to do that, or we could re-advertise the second position to all members. So we're recommending that the nomination form from Councillor Cox be considered, and that the committee consider any nominations received up until the meeting, but obviously we haven't had any further nominations.
I spy visiting members. Actually, I should put my glasses on, then I can spy you properly. Councillor English.
I did not put a nomination forward, although I did consider it, because my understanding was that the Howard de Walden nominations are not supposed to come up at the same time. They are supposed to be phased, and have been in the past. So if that's changed, that was my misunderstanding, and that is why I didn't put in a nomination. I have been a trustee in the past and would certainly have been willing to put my name forward if that had been clear. So I don't think you necessarily should assume that there are not councillors interested, because there are, and there's one standing here.
Councillor English, might I ask you to clarify, are you nominating yourself? And if so, would you like to just rattle through your credentials?
I don't think I can, because I think that the nominations actually have to be posted in advance before a committee meeting. However, I'm just saying that they have to be on the agenda paper, I believe, don't they?
No, as long as the item is on the agenda paper, then that's all that matters.
Okay, that's interesting, because I was advised to the contrary 2 years ago. Not
Don't
by
worry,
anyone.
I'm chairing the meeting now, so...
Okay, in that case, Mr. Councillor Pearl, Mr. Chairman, I am putting my name forward.
Would you just like to rattle through, just for a record, your credentials for the...
Yeah, certainly. When previously there was not an East Ward councillor or a North Ward councillor available, I put my name forward to serve on the Board of Trustees and did for 2 years. I would have continued, but because of the appointment provision, when an East Ward councillor became available, Councillor Cox, I was unable to continue. I would have done, and was contributing at that time. Given that there is now a vacancy, I would like to take up that position again.
Excellent, thank you. Do any other members have any comments on this? Then I propose that, as hilarious as it would be to reject Councillor Cox, we mustn't look a gift horse in the mouth, so I propose that we appoint both Councillor Cox and Councillor English as to the Howard de Walden Centre Board of Trustees. Is that agreed, members? Thank you very much, both of you. Now then, item 18, recovery and renewal actions, and this is going to be introduced by Mrs. Woodhouse.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman. So as committee members will be aware, the Council has been developing a plan for recovery and renewal from the COVID-19 pandemic following the release of a significant amount of one-off funding from government. An action plan has been developed following briefings with councillors, service committee chairs and vice chairs, and several meetings of the Policy and Resources Committee. In July, Policy and Resources considered the draft plan and agreed that each service committee should consider those actions that fall within their terms of reference. This is attached at Appendix A. The committee is asked to consider and comment on the actions proposed and raise any new actions for consideration by Policy and Resources to aid the borough's recovery and renewal. Detail on each action has been provided. And additional detail has been provided on the proposed Community Resilience Fund following the discussion at Policy and Resources. Page 39 onwards contains a draft application form to be used by community and voluntary sector organisations applying for the fund. And for Council's information, we have based the fund on the successful winter funding grant we ran earlier this year, which funded projects to keep people fed and warm during the winter months. The fund's purpose will be to aid recovery and renewal for our residents through providing funding for community initiatives to mitigate the effects of the pandemic, for example, tackling loneliness, improving mental health and well-being, and we have included a list of examples on page 39 for information. Other actions in the plan include equipping Trinity Foyer to create a community hub, funding to support volunteering in the borough, and a project to provide funding for community environmental projects to encourage civic pride. Happy to take any questions, and I look forward to hearing your views. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Councillor Webb and then Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was at the member briefing where all this detail was put together, and I did raise a concern. That concern is now been elevated to a serious concern, because what I don't see here, I see great lump sums of money, and I know that you've done a lot of work on the Community Resilience Fund, 150,000, but I am concerned that we are agreeing to spend what are quite vast sums of money on what will be projects which will have an impact, but what I don't see are the criteria behind those projects. I don't see enough of the detail to be able to say, yes, I agree with that. We've got a broad brush, and which is what I said at that first meeting. I like the broad brush. What I don't see is enough of the actual detail behind it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Woodhouse, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions regarding additional detail, and if there are things you would like more detail on, I can talk to, because each project's sort of looked after by different heads of service, so I can get that information ahead of policy and resources if there's particular things you're concerned about, and I'm happy to take that outside the meeting if that's easier, or comments tonight, and I can go away and make sure before it comes to policy and resources in October that information is there. As you said, we put a lot of effort into the Community Resilience Fund, because I know that was a big concern at policy and resources, so we've made sure that's really clear. The Love Where You Live and Get Involved project was heavily covered at the presentation to councillors, so Alison, actually, Chief Exec, run through quite a lot of detail on that project, so I know that was covered in detail. The Community Hub, John's here, so I'm sure John could comment on that if you have questions. And the other two projects, so the support and encourage volunteering in the borough, at the moment we've put that as £25,000, and what we're envisaging that being is probably a system to support volunteering. As we know, Involve are looking at a project, so we're looking at working with them. So at the moment we don't know the detail of that because we're working with a partner, but we wanted to have money available that we could use. And of course the other thing is with this is we'll be reporting into committees on progress with the action plan and how the money's being spent. So there will be regular updates and information, but I take on board your concerns, and I'm happy to, you know, if you let me know comments and feedback, I can take that on board before it goes to P&R, if that's okay.
Would you like to come back on that?
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate everything you've said. I'm happy to have conversations outside of this meeting to hopefully, reassure me in the direction we're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. The report is here for longevity as well. It's not just what's set before us. And I wonder, it's incredibly hard for small organisations to get bank accounts. And being able to have a treasurer's account with a bank is quite difficult to get. And I wondered whether there was any way that as the borough we could retain the money and then pay the monies that they need for specific things. Say it was building a new wing to a shed or something, and they knew how much it was going to cost. Rather than give them over the money and them being able to go through all these hoops, whether we could keep the money and pay the bills that are presented, therefore mitigating. Now, if that's possible, I just wonder if it would open up to groups that don't have all of this behind them, because I think we're almost playing to quite a select audience, opening this up to only a certain criteria of able groups. So if that could be looked into, that would be brilliant. And also, on page 41, how will successful bids be selected? It's a bit like Groundhog Day. This group does not seem to be very politically balanced. Because we heard that a year or so ago, and there is just no way that you're going to get, by having the chair and vice chair, you aren't going to get, you'll only have one political group there at all. And I wondered whether there was any option to have a subcommittee of this committee rather than just the chair and vice chair. Just something to consider, not asking for a ruling or whatever now.
Now, I should say that I anticipated both of these points, and in our discussions before the meeting, I've raised the issue about access for smaller organisations to the funds. Not necessarily, I didn't raise the particular bank account issue, but I raised things like, the various policies and procedures. There's a difference between, say, an organisation like Involve Kent, for argument's sake, giving them £5,000 and giving £500 to sort of the Allington Active Retirement people. I believe the officers are very flexible on all that. On the second point, again, I did anticipate this. What I was suggesting was that it was jolly nice indeed that the consultation that was being proposed, but I believe we did talk about the particular awards being, each award being reported to members of the committee as not as and when they occurred, but sort of on a periodic basis. I don't know if the officers have any points they wish to add on to that.
That's a draft, what we've produced at the moment, so I'm really happy for any feedback from members on developing the what we've set out before you in terms of the application form and the criteria and so on. Really happy to have your feedback based upon your experiences. Obviously, we can bring back the paperwork to be agreed by committee and a process to be agreed by committee, if that's what you wanted. Obviously, that will delay us being able to get things up and running, but we can do that if you would like.
If I can just come back, I certainly do not want to stop these projects starting, but I think even if it was in conjunction with or a half-hour meeting just to go over something and say, well, yeah, I can see why these have been chosen, or, well, hang on, you didn't think about this. It could be as little as that. I think if we bring it to a committee, we're going to have to wait a cycle, we'll delay things. So I don't really see, whatever the chairman's thinking of how to balance it or how to pick somebody or two people, then that might be good, and just a half-hour Zoom call or whatever call you want to make it, Skype would work.
I know Mrs. Woodhouse is going to come in before she does, though. I'd be quite happy, and I don't know if, what other members think. I'd be quite happy with the idea that we get a few applications and a few members who wish to from this committee, have a meeting with officers, and we just have a chat them through. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Mrs. Woodhouse, sorry.
I think you've just said what I was going to say, but I say if you can nominate a panel or a subcommittee, that's fine. We can.
I think we should just do it informally, given that it's consultation, not decision. So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I then have Councillor Perry, and then I believe, are you indicating Councillor McKenna? No, you're just sort of moving your hand around, sorry. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a question. I think I raised this at P&R, actually, and I'm still slightly not confused, but I just, where in Appendix A, you've got these allocations, and I'm just wondering how you arrived at, you've got 25k and you've got 30k and you've got 35k, and I'm just wondering how these were arrived at, and are they set in tablets of stone? I mean, could you, for instance, if you don't spend in one, can you make a virement and charge another budget heading? Is there flexibility in this?
So The idea is if we wanted to change, I think we'd have to come back to committee. So we'd probably come back to P&R and say, this is how it's going. And even though we thought it was going to be X, actually it turns out this one's really popular. Or, for example, I don't know, the volunteering in the borough, it might work out that actually we only need 15k because it's a particular system, we're going to buy it. In which case we come back and say, right, there's 10k now back in the pot. You can either allocate it to a new thing or allocate it to something you've already got. So it'd be up to, we take it back to policy and resources, and that's part of that reporting back process, so you can see where the money's being spent. We wouldn't just move it around. I think I'd get told off for that, and Mark wouldn't be very happy. So yeah, it'll come back to committee for decision.
But there is some flexibility.
Yeah, yeah, there will be. Yeah.
Have we got any more questions on that? Members? Right, so, he says now just trying to get back to the briefing note. So the report is for decision. I suppose I'd better move the recommendation on the papers then. Yeah. Is that agreed, members? Excellent. So that then brings us to item 19, which is the England Trees Action Plan update, and which will be presented by Mr. Wilderspin. I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
That's right, Chair. Wilderspin.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair and members. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm James Wilderspin, the new Biodiversity and Climate Change Manager at Grace Borough Council. And I'd just like to give you an overview of the England Trees.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that, and that's quite a lot of detail. I can see Councillor Cox and then Councillor Rose and then Councillor Newton.
Thank you very much, and James, nice to meet you, even if it's virtual. It's nice to meet new staff. You've mentioned two things here that quite interested me. The call for sites, how long will that be taking, and when will it start, one? You talked about tree planting. I know that Dartford Borough are considering planting a tree for each birth that takes place within the year, each year in the borough. And I think that's a brilliant way of almost future-proofing the ability to have forests when that child wants to run in one, perhaps, or do a triathlon through one, perhaps at a later stage. But the information that we see within the document shows the growth within 10 to 30 years. And therefore, if, I don't know how many it would be, probably 500, 600, 700, I don't know. But if we were setting aside an area for a population wood, I wonder if that would be considered and what other councillors think of that idea.
Mrs. Rose.
Yes, welcome Mr Willisburn to Maidstone Borough. I have two questions and I would be grateful for your comments on them. You mentioned right trees in the right place, and I think we have seen trees that are breaking pavements or whatever, and I wonder your comments on that. You've also mentioned how will trees be protected. So I think we'd be grateful for your comments on both that, right trees and the protection of these trees, please. Yeah, thank you for your answers.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you very much. I'm the ward member for Downswood and Ottham. The area has lost a considerable amount of trees, because of the thrust by Maidstone Borough Council to build houses, thousands of them. Now, we have an area in Ottham, basically, very near to Ottham Church, which is one of the Grade 1 listed buildings in the country, of which there are only 6% are Grade 1 listed. There is a field which is on the east side of Church Road, and I'd like to see part of that field joined up with the remaining part of the ancient woodland that still exists before planners get their hands on it. So I shall be coming after you to come and visit me in Ottham, and I'll show you the devastation that's been done and how we can correct it. What we don't want to be doing is wasting trees near footpaths, because all they do is grow and pull the footpath apart. And then, but anyway, this is open area that needs to be considered seriously for a future forest. I won't be around to see it, but I would like to drive this one forward for the village of Ottham and possibly Langley as well. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks, James.
Thank you for that, Mr. Wilderspin. Are there any other questions from the committee? Excellent. So I'll just make 2 points. The first is to thank you for your detailed answers this morning to my questions, which I did circulate to the rest of the committee, but apologies to the visiting members who I didn't anticipate being here. So if you haven't seen them, apologies for that. One of the issues I did raise in those questions, Mr. Wilderspin, was the possible sort of quantification and setting of targets, which you explained can't be done at the moment. Could we look forward to you coming back in a few months with some numbers for us? Excellent. Thank you very much. Now then, members, this report is for noting. Is this duly noted? Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Wilderspin. Now then, members, this brings us to item 20, Brenchley Gardens. And this is going to be presented by Mr. James.
Good evening, members. Brenchley Gardens is a hidden gem within our town centre. Despite its urban location, its beauty provides an oasis for many in our busy town centre. Unfortunately, the reputation of the gardens has been blighted by some misuse and occasional instances of criminality. The report provided to members sets out the steps the Community Protection Team has taken to not only challenge and reduce unwanted behaviour, but also how a working group made up of internal teams and external partners have committed to changing the unwanted narrative our little park has. The recommendations are as follows. that the committee endorses the approach set out in the body of the report to address community safety concerns and to create a more positive environment at Brenchley Gardens, and that the committee directs the Head of Housing and Community Services to provide an update report in November at the meeting of this committee.
Thank you very much. Now, on my list is to address the meeting first, once it's safe to do so, is Councillor Nagy.
Sorry, can you put your microphone on? Thank you.
Yeah, I was on, yeah. What actually made me more passionate was I was working by Brenchley Gardens end of May at Bank Holiday weekend, where it was very lawless, out of control, lots of things going on, no police presence at all, because I had to keep coming out for some air with the work I was doing. And then when I came in Monday morning, Bank Holiday, the road was shut off because of an incident that actually ended up in Brenchley Gardens late at night on the Sunday. And that ended up being an attempted murder. And as most councillors would know, we do get a lot of grief for what goes on in Maidstone because they do see their local councils a lot more than other representatives, elected representatives. So we do know what's going on a lot more than other people. And as a result of what I saw that weekend, I've been moved to bring this up, and I've been suggesting for a long time now since then that really Brenchley Gardens should be shut when it's dark. I mean, we used to have this with Moat Park. Moat Park used to be open till late at night, but then that had to be shut and the gates closed because of the same sort of reasons, really. And I've seen the papers. We got the Kent PCSOs in there at the moment, but that's only a temporary issue. It's nice to see something going on, which sort of highlights the fact of what I'm saying is correct because they've been moved in there. But they'll be gone soon. And I think the whole reason of locking it at night, as was with that incident, it didn't start in Brenchley Gardens. It ended up in Brenchley Gardens. And my view was, if there'd been a gate or it had been shut, Brenchley Gardens, that incident would have kept on the highway in the public domain. And people would have seen what was going on. Because once it got into Brenchley Gardens, it's quiet, it's dark, there's no cameras, and no one knows what goes on in there. And my personal view is, no public people or normal people using the facilities would want to go into the park when it's dark. And I think with what's happened that particular night, I think it's time we should now look into gating it in some way. I know the gate to a high-level bridge is mainly closed these days for one reason or another, on advice. And there's never been a gate by St. Faith's Church, just a post. And I know there used to be a gate by the museum, but obviously that disappeared in the war. And there was never a gate reinstated at any time after that. And I think now is the time the council should look into it. And maybe this committee will decide, in its wisdom, that we do need the gates back one way or another. And then police at night would know, seeing anyone in there, would know that they're probably up to no good. And I just think now is the time that we should be doing this, and we shouldn't really wait till someone else nearly gets murdered again before we start thinking about it. And in my view, hopefully this committee by the end of this year will look into it. There'll be a price for gating, and that a decision will be made and the money found, because I think we owe it to people in the future that nothing really goes on in Brenchley Gardens when it gets dark, because I can't think of anything other than, well, I can't think of anything that goes on in Brenchley Gardens after dark that the public would appreciate. So my view is it's time, and this committee should be looking to see how much it would be to gate it and make that decision, which I think has to happen. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. Councillor English, would you like to speak on this subject? Sorry.
I don't think there's any particular need to, because Councillor Nagy and I are at the same address currently. So given that my current address is 19 Moat Avenue, which is Councillor Nagy's address as well, I don't think there's any particular need to sterilise it between the two of us. But now, I can think of some recreational uses of a non-violent nature that take place in Brenchley Gardens after nightfall. I'm not sure we need to encourage them, but they do take place. What I would like to say is that I don't disagree or agree necessarily at this stage with the particular point that was made, but I do think there are some issues that we do need to consider. First of all, there have been a lot of changes made to Brenchley Gardens over the past few years, both good ones and bad ones. The common factor is that virtually none of them took place with any degree of significant consultation with members who represent town centre wards, including the ward in which this is. I have no problem whatsoever with the fact that there's a working group that has come forward with, officer working group that has come forward with some good suggestions that need to be taken forward. I do have a problem with the fact that the report doesn't mention biodiversity at all, and there are some significant issues in the park of a biodiversity nature which actually could be addressed and could also have a positive benefit in terms of the antisocial behaviour agenda. I think the two things do overlap. And I think it's notable that the report, which is a good report in many ways, doesn't really mention member involvement. I think I would like to see further discussion take place, as is indeed intended on the items that are set out, but for those items to include biodiversity, and for that discussion with the working group to include ward members, because I really do think that we have something to contribute to this discussion. I also think that in terms of community outreach, which is mentioned in this paper, quite rightly, we need to consider that community outreach needs to address the building where a lot of this problem is coming from, which is the immediately neighbouring building, which I will not name, but we all know which one it is, and which there are a lot of problems with. When planning applications went forward in recent years, we were hoping that overlooking of the park would actually contribute significantly to improving it and making it safer. And in the case of Mackenzie Court, in relation to the bottom part of the park, this may well have happened. However, there are issues with another property nearby where some, and I stress not all, not even the majority, but some of the residents are causing significant problems. We need to have an appropriate community outreach there, bearing in mind that the management of that building is hardly cooperative. So there are going to be issues, but we do need to address that. But cutting this long story short, I would ask the committee to endorse the report as it stands, but to add a concern about biodiversity concerns to point 1, and also add a point 3, if it's a point 3, to ensure that the working group discussions that are carried forward actually include ward members in those discussions, because we will need to communicate the plan that is adopted, as has been said in relation to other issues like no-mo. We were the ones who are going to have to go out there and help the council communicate whatever the strategy is for addressing these concerns that is arrived at between members, officers and other agencies. So please include us into the process, which may or may not include gating, but we're not at this stage yet, into the process, so we are not in a position of having to fire fusillades from outside. So I ask you, Mr. Chairman, members, to amend the recommendation appropriately.
Thank you, Councillor English. Can I see indications, please, from members. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We've heard from 2 local councillors. We've indeed looked at what's before us on the papers. To me, practicality and actually the ability to restrict access to this corner, which is a park. The access is on 2 and a bit sides. To the south nearer the to the south nearer the river. It doesn't need to. There used to be a zoo there, so obviously they didn't want animals getting out, and we don't want anybody getting in. But I think to shut it, as it's a corner and it is a thoroughfare, people go from Fremlin Walk right the way through the middle and into the station. They can use that as a shortcut to then go across to the barracks and over and to the station itself. And I think to shut it off, it is almost giving in to the negative aspect that is going on in the park itself at a limited time of day. I believe the police, Kent Police, are on this. They're looking at this. And I just don't really see the practicality of shutting this off. If we were looking back in history when the museum had a gatehouse, there's one side that's all taken into consideration. And indeed, to the north, the foliage has been taken out to restrict there to be places for people to hide. So it is more open, but if we were to just put gates on there, people would leap up onto a fence, jump over the fence and continue on their way. Alongside of the museum, that would be, I don't see how we could have a fence along that access point. So I think we need to turn to the police to almost protect this area, I suppose, increase the walking and driving by of the police at various times of the day. We need to analyse what happens in the next quarter, certainly, but I think we're going to see a lot more problems if we try and lock it than if we try and put things into the park, as we've heard in the cluster meetings that have been set up with our own officers and the police involvement. And we will be able to see what results from putting more entertainment during the day and almost saying to people, this is everybody's park. We aren't going to be deterred from being in here. I think walking across there, increasing the lighting, maybe one thing to look at. So those are my views on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chair. Well, having worked in Brenchley Gardens quite considerably on restoring the cenotaph when it's been vandalised, when it's been urinated against by yobs, it was designed by Sir Edward Lutyens, so it's a listed structure. I've sat there in my van, having sandwiches, and watched drug dealing going on in front of the War Memorial, or just to the side of it, near the old toilets that were there, which were closed for the same reason that we're now sitting here talking about it, because it was being vandalised. The only way I believe we can move on with this one, personally, would be to fence it with gates. Now, there's a lot of wall there. It used to have railings on it, but unfortunately, when the war came, they were cut off. And that, you know, we're talking about the 1940s here, but that's what it was then, and it was a pleasant place to go. I remember it as a child. I mean, I was young there, but what needs to, the type that we're getting people that are coming to Maidstone that use this place to distribute drugs across the southeast of England. And we need to deal with it. And I would totally support what Councillor Nagy has said, that is gates and a fence round it, nicely painted black with points on the top, stop them climbing over, and also a planting regime with things like pyrocanthus, because you wouldn't want to get into that stuff once it gets hold of you. It'll tear you to pieces. And this is what needs to be looked at. Completely a wide scope of issues, one at a time, from the budget, and I'm certain we could stop the problems in Brenchley Gardens, and it would be a better place for the borough of Maidstone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. I've got Councillor Webb next, and then Councillor McKenna.
I couldn't agree more with the words from the previous councillor. My view very clearly is that we need to take action, and we need to take it now. Because as good as the police are, their priority will not be Brenchley Gardens. And as much as they try to police it, they won't police it at the times that the so-called young people are going to be there, and the reputation of Brenchley Gardens will not improve until we as councillors take a stance, close the park, get a fence up, whatever foliage, shrubs you want to put up there, happy with that. But I would also support putting lighting around the periphery of Brenchley Gardens, whether it's permanent lighting or whether it's motion lighting. I think in that way we will protect Brenchley Gardens, and the reputation of Maidstone in particular will be enhanced by the decision to move quickly on Brenchley Gardens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. Councillor McKenna.
Again, yes, I agree with two previous councillors. I don't think that the police can police it. I don't think they have the resources to do it. I think when you're talking about, attempted murder and things like that, as much as Councillor Cox says a previous time, we're in a generation where people don't care, and life is very cheap. So I totally agree. I think it needs to be cordoned off, fenced off, however you will. From a personal view, I wouldn't go near it because I'm scared of what would happen if I walked through that at any time of the day. And that's a personal view. So I do think anything that can be done to close it off, as was done with Moat Park, for that reason, needs to be done.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKenna. Before I bring the officers back in, I'll just make a few comments. I live quite close to Brenchley Gardens. I live sort of just on St Peter's Street, and my office is then on the other side of Brenchley Gardens. It's not the building Councillor English alluded to in terms of where all the trouble comes from, I should add. So I walk through Brenchley Gardens sort of typically twice a day, and in the mornings, if I'm early enough, it obviously looks a mess because that's before our people have got there to tidy it up. But it is sort of nice to sort of walk through at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and our people are hard at work, tidying it up, trying to make it nice for the general public to, for the normal people in Maidstone to enjoy. And so I do sort of feel sort of quite sort of keenly linked to Brenchley Gardens. By the afternoon, it starts filling up with all the sorts of characters, and that's when the noise and the antisocial behaviour tends to, in my experience at least, tends to begin. Now, so that we have something on the table, I would like to move as follows, and that is the 2 points in the report that Mr. James has already read out, but also thirdly, that officers are asked to pursue further and to bring forward firm proposals and costings in the next committee report as to securing and locking the grounds at night, additional CCTV coverage, additional lighting at night, and for securing the bandstand. And fourthly, officers are asked to meet with interested members to discuss landscaping and biodiversity matters and to include any resulting actions and or proposals when reporting to this committee on the Parks Delivery Plan for Biodiversity. That's what I moved. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Now, would officers like to respond to any of the points raised?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to respond immediately. Mr. James might want to come in and add to what I'm going to say. Thank you for your additional proposals. I didn't quite catch all of it, but hopefully the committee clerk has. I agree that the intention always was to bring the report back to the end of November meeting to give us an opportunity to certainly have a discussion with park users, with the people that, as Councillor Cox has explained, do use that as a thoroughfare, so that we can understand what the impact will be for people that do use the park in that way, so that when you reconsider the matter at the end of November, you can do so from an informed position. So I'm grateful for that opportunity to bring that back. In terms of liaison with members, I mean, we had done that through the cluster meetings, and we appreciate that you're all very busy people, so we try to avoid having more meetings than are necessary. So by meeting with local members in those cluster meetings, it is and has been used as an opportunity to talk about issues such as this. Quite happy to take on board the points that have been made about biodiversity, and the immediate response was for this report to be written, what was in response to those concerns about safety. I would encourage members to visit the park, because a lot of this is about perception and taking into account what Councillor Powell has said in terms of his experience. Families do use the park, so it is not the sort of place that is out of bounds for people. So it is concerning to hear members say that they wouldn't use the park, because that reinforces an incorrect perception about the park, which is what a lot of the work that's being done to change how it's used and how people view the park can only be for everybody's benefit, and make that park a more positive place, so that we can then displace the unwanted behaviour and instead we'll have behaviour that we all want to see. So thank you, Chairman. I don't know if Mr. James wants to add anything else.
Thank you, John. Just to echo what John said, we'll take on board the comments made, and again, the ward cluster meetings are designed particularly for that purpose, where you've got an area of interest within a ward area or a cluster area. The Brenchley Gardens has been a standing item on that action plan since its inception. Granted, we only had 2 meetings so far, but it will be something that we'll continue to discuss going forward. The idea around, from a community safety point of view, the idea around closing the park, and one of the reasons we wanted to bring another report with more firmed up ideas around what that might look like, was that we have to take into consideration all the points that have been raised already around the use of the park and when these issues are happening. Gating the park isn't going to stop drug dealing if that's happening in the broad daylight, so that's not a factor really. The other factor we have to take into consideration is, at the moment, whilst we don't want some of the behaviour that happens in Brenchley Gardens, we know where it's happening, and we can put in place safeguarding with partners and with our own officers and the police to safeguard the young people that are in that park. If we displace them, we have to consider where they will go and what that will look like. Because the fact of the matter is we have members on our working group that were young people that used to hang out in Brenchley Gardens when they were teenagers. So it's not a new problem, it's not a new phenomenon. I take your point, Councillor, about how violence has evolved. That is something that we obviously take into consideration with all of our decisions around dealing with young people and violence in particular. And we are looking at putting in place measures that will support that in terms of raising understanding, working with the parks, grounds people around what's referred to as bystander training and those sort of things. I'm not dismissing the fact that I definitely think we should look at gating the park in some way, but not until we've had that really deep kind of dive into what does that actually look like and what does that do to those problems in terms of displacement, and will it actually stop the problems that we are most concerned about. And the only other point I was going to make was that recently there was 2 elephants spotted, so I don't know whether the zoo's been back, but there's definitely been some wildlife in there recently.
Thank you very much. Now I've got I've got Councillor Cox, Councillor Webb, and then Councillor Newton. Before I call Councillor Cox, can I just make the point that I believe some of the issues concerning communication are not necessarily criticism of the excellent work that's being done in terms of the ward clusters. It's some of the, just repeating what Councillor Harwood has said to me, it's some of the historic stuff in terms of the disappearance of the pond, you know, the odd tree disappearing, those sorts of things occurring without sort of consultation with relevant members rather than necessary criticism of your work. Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. I've listened to everybody, and what I'm hearing is, indeed you, Mr. Chairman, are saying that once 2 o'clock comes, there are a lot of people going into the park that we wouldn't particularly want to have in the park. So is the suggestion then that it's sort of a 2 o'clock shutting of the gates? Because where are you going to move the people who are going to do what Mr. James is saying? They're just going to go to another park or another place around Maidstone, rather than doing the dealing wherever it's going to happen. They'll go to the back end of the pub round by the prison, I don't know, but there are various places and anywhere that this can happen. And I just think, I started my comment out by saying, let's not do this too quickly. Let's consider, what's going to be proposed, because I really do think that we need to consider the very large cost of putting something like Councillor Newton is saying with the wrought iron or iron railings, because it would have to be, you know, certainly down the Brenchley House side, and then something across the front by the museum, and then doing something with the hole in the gate, in the brick wall to the station side. That's the easiest part. But doing this, then when are you going to close it? You know, sunset is when Moat Park gets closed, but you can still get into Moat Park because it does have pedestrian access. It's shut off to vehicles, but you can still walk through the park, and I think a lot of people will say, this is our open space. We need to have things done to bring it back more into our control, to show that it is an area that people will want to use. And I think removing the toilets is the best thing, even though they're not open. It's terrible. Let's have a concession in there that can arrive in a van, trade throughout the day, and then whenever they choose to not trade, that's when the people aren't going to be there, and the police will police this area. We need to show them that it is not an area, because that time will just go backwards. You'll say 7, 8:30, 9:30, and it'll come back and back because the deals will be done on the earlier trains.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. As a point of information on what's on the table, the proposal that refers to securing and locking the grounds at night. Councillor Webb next.
I couldn't disagree more with what Councillor Cox has just said. I firmly believe that we need to close Brenchley Gardens at dusk. The actions that take place after dusk in Brenchley Gardens are not policed. They will not be policed regularly enough to stop the type of action that we want to stop to be stopped. I hear what colleagues at the top of the table, sorry, it's a big table, have said tonight, but I don't agree with you. And I think the sooner this report is done, the sooner these recommendations are put forward in a meaningful way back to this committee, the sooner we can get some action done. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Newton next, and then Councillor McKenna.
I think the points raised by Councillor Webb are very pertinent. It needs to be closed at dusk, the same as the cemetery and other parks in Maidstone that have gates. I've actually seen what goes on there during the day, and I've spoken to some of the workmen there in the park, and they are frightened to say things about what they're seeing because of the potential violence in there. I've watched, as I said earlier on, drug dealing going on openly, and in one case, one of these youths had a baseball bat. When he caught sight of a police officer coming in there, he threw it in the bushes. And I went across to two police officers, and I said, it's been thrown in the bushes, and they were using it. And it was a weapon, as you see in a lot of places, to persuade people to pay for their drugs, basically. And, you know, the police do not police it, you're quite right. They might go in there once every now and then. They do go in there sometimes in the morning when the school children are going to the grammar schools or wherever across the bridge, but they do not regularly police it. They do not have the resources to do so. And I strongly believe, again, as I'll say it again, I believe it needs to be fenced all the way around with a nice style of iron fences like it was when it was originally put there, and it needs significant gates near the museum, any inlet or outlet there that can be closed at night. And that's the problem, is the nighttime drug economy, and it's big. You may have seen the Panorama programme recently that was featured Maidstone in there with county lines. The county lines, a lot of the drugs are passed on. We watched one man come on 2 days passing drugs across to youths that congregate near the bandstand. You know, it's obvious, but there's no police officers come. We tell them you're here at the wrong time if we see them, but we don't. And some of these, the knives and things that are carried, and baseball bats, you know, they're intimidating. And I suspect, I don't know whether the gardeners have had those incidents, but I've actually seen it and worked through what goes on. And the police do not want to know because they don't have the resources to deal with it. And, you know, I know the people of Maidstone will be very grateful for the protection of a fence around there. They can still use it. They can walk through to wherever they want to go. But when dusk comes, shut them all. Anyway, that's my view on it. And
thank you, Councillor Newton.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take Councillor McKenna, and then I suggest we move to the vote.
So I probably want to bring this to a close. It's quite clear everyone's very passionate in their own way. I think for me, there may not be any magic answer, but I suppose, you know, we're just after 8:30 now. If I was to ask every single one of you in the room, officers, councillors, a rhetorical question, give it another hour or so, would any of you feel safe walking through there on your own? And I wouldn't. And it's a rhetorical question that doesn't need answer, and that's to everyone here. And I think if you can find the answer to that yourselves, you know what needs to be done from there. That would probably be my point in closing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McKenna. Now, the motion on the table then is the 2 points that are on page 89 of your bundle, plus the 2 additional points I read, which I'll read again, just so that Mrs. Banks can get them and that is that thirdly, officers are asked to pursue further and to bring forward firm proposals and costings in the next committee report as to, securing and locking the grounds at night, additional CCTV coverage, additional lighting at night, and for securing the bandstand. And then fourthly, officers are asked to meet with interested members to discuss landscaping and biodiversity matters and to include any resulting actions and all proposals when reporting to this committee on the Parks Delivery Plan for Biodiversity. Now, can I ask all those in favour, please? Those against? Abstentions? Thank you. So that's carried then. Now, that brings us to the next item, which is the Community Safety Plan timetable, item 21. And again, that's Mr. James to introduce that.
Actually, I'm going to ask Councillor, I'm going to ask Mr. Littlemore to introduce this report, if that's okay.
Okay, of course, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Members, as you know, we've been discussing the Community Safety Plan for the last couple of meetings now, and the next iteration of this is the more substantive 3-year review. So as part of formulating that document, there is a desire to obviously go out and consult with stakeholders, including members of the public. But as importantly, it is really how members yourselves want to engage as part of that process. So in 2.4, we set out the timetable for the new plan to go to Council for adoption. And we have put in there on the 9th of September, although I don't think that date's available anymore, a member briefing session so that we can have that engagement with you. And not just members of this committee, but also more widely. So really we're seeking members' views about how we do that, and if that is your preferred modus operandi for carrying this forward, or whether you may feel that just having overview through the committee process is adequate. So it's really to seek your views on how we do that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would any of the visiting members like to raise on this subject? Sorry, I said visiting members. You're a normal member, Simon. Yeah. Councillor English.
Just an observation that in terms of the previous debate and on this one, the cluster meetings which discuss community safety are very, very useful, but they don't give a format for in-depth discussion of particular issues. However we go forward with community safety plan, we need to have a situation where issues like the ones that we just discussed in Brenchley Gardens are properly discussed through with ward members. It's not just that area, there are others as well. We need to have some form of mechanism. And I didn't intervene again, but actually I was hoping that we, as ward members, we could have discussions on the antisocial behaviour issues around Brenchley Gardens as well. I know it's too late to amend the recommendation and visiting members can't come back again. But somehow when we go forward with the community safety plan timetable, we need to have a way of facilitating longer discussions about more involved issues like this, because the cluster meeting is valuable, but 5 minutes in a cluster meeting of many more councillors covering multi-wards is not going to get to the bottom of these detailed issues, especially when many of our partner organisations don't report back for months or even a year.
Thank you, Councillor English. Would anyone else like to? Councillor Webb.
Yes, I'd like to support the recommendation that we do go out to public consultation. The other points I would like to make, and I apologise if I come across in the way that I do, as this is my first CHI meeting, I would want to see within this plan effective targets, and targets that are going to have an impact. Because all too often I've read a number of community safety plans and they are full of words, lack of targets, lack of impact, and we need to make sure that if we are proposing and recommending a community action plan, then it must have action for the community in a way that's going to have an impact for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Right. Were you moving a proposal, sorry?
Happy to propose.
What would you like to propose?
I'd like to propose a recommendation that's in the paper.
Is that seconded? Councillor Newton, is that agreed, members?
Sorry, before that's passed, can I just add maybe to, subject to the amendment of the date of the 9th of September, if that's now unavailable? Is that okay to add to the recommendation? So I think Mr. Littlemore said in his introduction that the 9th of September is no longer available. So if the recommendation is to approve that timetable, it might just be worth putting an amendment in to note that the 9th of September might change.
I think we're quite content with that, aren't we? Yeah. Okay. So all right. So that's all agreed then. Excellent. Okay. So that then concludes the business. So I declare the meeting over.